During the Cold War, military planners faced a problem that, honestly, modern outdoor gear still struggles to solve. Soldiers operating in forests, mountains and frozen ground weren't failing because they lacked insulation. No, they were failing because moisture turned insulation into a liability. Sleeping bags trapped sweat, absorbed ground damp, and, well, froze solid overnight. In response, Cold War militaries quietly relied on a different solution, a vapor-controlled sleeping liner that prioritized dryness over bulk warmth. It was simple, unglamorous, and frankly, brutally effective. Decades later, its logic remains one of the most misunderstood breakthroughs in field survival. Why Cold War environments expose the limits of sleeping bags? From Eastern Europe to Siberia, Cold War forces trained for long static deployments in cold, wet conditions. Soldiers slept in foxholes, unheated shelters and armoured vehicles where condensation was, really, just unavoidable. Thick sleeping bags absorb body moisture night after night until, eventually, insulation collapsed. Once wet, bags became heavier, colder and impossible to dry in sub-zero environments. Commanders realized that adding more insulation only delayed failure. The real enemy was internal moisture. So let's talk about how the liner actually works. It's a bit clever, really, and not just about adding another layer for warmth. The liner's main job is to manage the moisture coming from the body before it gets a chance to soak into the insulation. That way, even in the harshest conditions, the insulation can keep doing its job. The liner was not designed to keep a soldier warm on its own. Its purpose was to manage vapor. Typically made from tightly woven cotton, rubberized fabric, or later coated nylon, the liner acted as a vapor barrier between the body and the outer insulation. Sweat produced during sleep was trapped inside the liner instead of migrating into the sleeping bag or blanket. This kept the insulation completely dry, even after weeks in the field. Dry insulation retains its thermal value indefinitely. Wet insulation fails quickly. Why staying dry mattered more than staying warm. Cold War research showed that a slightly cool but dry soldier survived better than a warm but damp one. Moisture next to the body leads to evaporative heat loss, rapid chilling and frost injury. The liner forced the body to adapt by reducing sweat production during sleep. Over several nights, soldiers acclimated, perspiring less and maintaining stable body temperature. This adaptation was impossible inside traditional sleeping bags that encouraged sweating. Out in the field, condensation could quickly become a real problem, you know. Moisture would build up inside the sleeping system, making everything damp and uncomfortable. Soldiers had to constantly manage this issue, since wet gear meant cold nights and, well, a much higher risk of hypothermia. The liner was placed directly against the skin or over a thin base layer. On top of it went blankets, quilted bags or parkas, depending on conditions. The liner itself was never meant to absorb moisture. In the morning, it was wiped dry or shaken out. The insulation remained untouched by sweat or ground damp. In wet environments, soldiers often slept directly on ponchos or spruce boughs, knowing the liner protected their core dryness even if external layers became damp. Why condensation did not become a problem inside the liner? Critics often assume vapor barriers cause internal soaking. But, Cold War tests showed the opposite when used correctly. Because the liner trapped warm, humid air close to the body, temperature remained high enough to prevent condensation. Moisture stayed in vapor form rather than liquid. The liner's smooth interior prevented pooling. This principle is still used today in high-altitude mountaineering vapor barrier systems. When you look at it, the performance of these systems, has only improved with time. Modern applications draw on the same core ideas, just with, better materials and a bit more know-how. In Arctic training exercises, liners proved decisive. Sleeping bags alone froze solid after several nights. But with liners, bags remained dry and flexible. Soldiers reported waking dry even when frost, formed on the outside of their insulation. The liner, it isolated the moisture problem to a controllable layer. In survival terms, this meant predictable sleep, preserved energy, and, reduced cold injuries over long deployments. Modern users can, replicate the Cold War liner approach using vapor barrier liners, lightweight bivy sacks, or even improvised plastic or coated fabric liners used carefully. The key is placement and discipline. The barrier must be inside the insulation, not outside. Clothing inside the liner should be minimal to avoid trapping liquid sweat. Insulation outside should be loose and dry. This method is especially effective for winter camping, emergency shelters, and long-term cold exposure. Basically, any situation where drying your gear is just impossible. Over time, though, the use of vapor barriers started to decline. Changing technology and evolving needs meant people were looking for new solutions. Still, in certain situations, especially extreme cold, the old ways can still be surprisingly relevant. As military doctrine shifted toward rapid deployment and lighter loads, vapor barriers were seen as uncomfortable and, a bit old-fashioned. Modern sleeping bags promised breathability and moisture-wicking solutions that worked well for short trips, but, they sort of failed over extended exposure. The liner system required understanding and adjustment, not just purchase. That made it less marketable, but not less effective. Why this Cold War knowledge still matters. Moisture remains the primary cause of cold weather failure. No fabric has eliminated sweat. No insulation works when wet. The Cold War liner acknowledged this reality and worked with the human body instead of against it. It accepted discomfort in exchange for reliability. In survival situations, Reliability matters more than comfort. This system represents a broader Cold War survival philosophy: control variables, reduce failure points, and prioritize long-term function over short-term comfort. It was not elegant, but it worked every time. If this deep dive into Cold War fieldcraft helped sharpen your understanding of real-world survival history, support In the Beginning by subscribing, sharing this episode, and helping preserve practical knowledge that modern gear often forgets.